Well, welcome everybody.
Real mountain experience.
We are so very, very happy to have you all with us today. For those of you who don't know me, I think I know everybody in the room, but I'm Karen Pulaski, and I live here at the mountain. I've lived here for the last 4 years. I've been involved in the mountain since before the mountain existed. As a student, I was invited in to look for land in the early 80s, so I've been involved in the mountain off and on for pretty much my entire adult life. We are just so happy to have you with us, and in a few moments, Allie is going to do some introductions. I'm sure all of you have noticed that Margaret is not with us today. Unfortunately, she is sick and was not able to come. I can guarantee you she was really excited about this and really excited to do this, and talked about how meaningful it was for her to come back to her roots to be able to share this information with you guys and share the day. So I can guarantee she is more disappointed than we are. But it will be videotaped and audio taped and all those wonderful things thanks to Don Smith. I do want to give a shout out to the group through the Council for Spirit and Life. The branch of Weekends and More is who organized and put this all together. If you guys could all stand for a moment so you can be recognized. Thank you for their very, very hard work. Just quickly, there are some desserts here. Please help yourself. You don't need to be invited. That's your invitation, so help yourself to it. Bathrooms are down this hallway. If those are full, you can go up the stairs in the back, and there's 2 more bathrooms up at the very top of the hallway. Would just like to open very briefly with a prayer and just a moment to remember Margaret, if everybody is good with that. So our good and gracious God, we thank you for the day. We thank you for the beautiful sunshine. We thank you for this group of people that is gathered here today. And as Lou is always quick to remind us, the beauty in the world sits right next to you. It resides in each and every one of us as we see the face in Christ in each of us. We pray to you in gratitude for Jean-Franc and Sister Margaret for their willingness to come and share everything that they know. We ask that you walk with us and that you help us to hear well today, not only to hear well from the people who will be speaking, but also to hear well from one another. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Brother Joe's going to be our moderator, and I'm going to turn it over to Allie for introductions now.
Hello, everyone. As Karen said, welcome. Yay for the sunshine that we have today. It's my incredible honor to be able to introduce our guests for today. A very small amount of history. I've had the pleasure of being taught by both Jean-Franc and Brother Joe. I took a few classes with Jean-Franc and was in choir with him for many years when I was at Bona's. And Joe's been teaching me all sorts of things since I first met him in 2009. So very honored to be able to introduce 2 very important people to me today. Jean-Franc Godet-Calogeras is a professor emeritus of the Franciscan Institute at St. Bonaventure University. He received his education in medieval studies at the Catholic University of Louvain, I hope I said that right, in his native Belgium. He has lectured extensively in the Americas and in Europe. Our moderator today is Brother Joe Kotula, OFM, who lives here at Mount Irenaeus. As a vowed religious friar, he brings the mountain to others through Mountain on the Road and Mountain in the Home ministries. Brother Joe is also the community liaison to the Weekends and More branch of the Council for Spirit and Life, which, as noted, is hosting today's conversation. We welcome you to enjoy the conversation today and hope everyone finds it a meaningful experience. Thank you.
So I think you want to begin by explaining some of your books over there.
Oh, you want me to do that? Let me see. There is one book. Maybe you should bring a copy of each. Okay. Out of the Shadows is a collection of little articles, although the first one is not little, written by Athena. It's all about Clare and Franciscan women. Those articles were published during the years in a little Franciscan magazine called Haversack that Athena was editor. At some point I became co-editor also. And in 1993-94 it was celebrating the anniversary of the birth of Clare. And we got that idea that why not put all those articles that have been published in one volume. And that's what we did. Around the same time, I had been asked to produce a little monograph on feminine symbols in the life of Clare. So I wrote it in French. Then Athena wanted to see it in English. At the time my English was not really at the level of producing a good translation, so I had a good friend, an Irish friar, who translated it, and then the sweat came. Because Athena and I, we sat and she went sentence by sentence. What do you mean here? This is not clear. So as a result, you have this little book on Clare, A Woman's Life. This is actually part of a series, 15 Days of Prayer with Clare. And it uses document of the writings of Clare, the life of Clare. It has been written by a good friend of mine, Marie-France Becker. She is a Poor Clare sister in Belgium. I actually taught her the writings of Francis and Clare in Latin, so she was particularly competent. And this is from another friend of mine, a scholar who lives in the Bay Area in California. She teaches at the Franciscan School of Theology, Darlene Price. And her focus of study is particularly the lay women of the 13th century. This is a collection, a little monographs of several of those women that she calls the women of the streets. Early Franciscan women and their mendicant vocation. So they are there, and I'm not taking them back.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. And as he said, they're over there on that, below are two icons of Dan Hurley and Dan Riley. And put a little basket there. Jean-Francois said, take one if you like. I said, how about if we put a little thing there that says, if you would prefer, leave a donation as well. So if you'd like to take a book and you have a donation you'd like to leave, fine. If not, fine. And since Margaret's not here, this was a book Margaret wrote, The Light of Assisi, the story of St. Clare. And I was looking through it last night and reading it and thought, oh my goodness, I'm not going to come up with any questions because Margaret's really detailed in this book. And what she writes about Clare, a lot of it's historical challenge, some things that are authentic and not authentic, but she really does a great job doing that. And makes me cry. I hope she's listening, Margaret, because, you know, I was looking forward to this duo.
Yes.
And I know you were too, Jean-Francois.
Yes.
And so we miss you, and we'll do our best. And hopefully you're watching. So, like any of these things, we've asked questions ahead of time. So, transparency, you know. Other people can call in questions, but one of the questions people came up with was this, Jean-Franc. When people hear the name of St. Clare, they often think of quiet prayer behind convent walls, cloistered. So who was Clare in reality? What ways her life like, and why was her way of life considered so radical?
The picture of Clare, nun in strict enclosure, is history. I mean, written by man. Her story is quite different. The problem is, and it was difficult for Clare and her companions, her sister, the society is a male society. The church is a male church. A canon lawyer in Germany, just a century before Clare and Francis, had one little expression that says it all. For a woman, maritum aut murum. They speak Latin. English, a husband or a wall. So, for a woman, she doesn't decide what she wants. The father will decide for the daughter. And the decision will be to find a good party, to find a young man and have a deal with the father. That's how marriage works at the time. If the father cannot find a husband for the woman, then she will be put in a nunnery, in a monastery. And of course that monastery has to be secure for two obvious reasons. If the young woman is put in the monastery against her will, she will try to escape by all means. And if she was actually in love with a young man, the young man will go everywhere in each monastery to find her love. So that explained the structure of carceral structure. You don't get in or out of the monastery easily. Not only that, the nuns should not be seen, so that if someone comes to find where she is, he will not be able to see her. That is the background at the time of Francis and Clare. But that's not what Clare wanted. She had no intention either to get married or to get into a monastery in enclosure. if you stay only with the history written by man, then you get the image that San Damiano was a monastery in strict enclosure. If you go to San Damiano, and then you go to the monastery of Santa Chiara in Assisi, San Damiano is outside, it is a pretty different architecture. It is very difficult to imagine living in San Damiano as in a strict enclosed monastery where we know there are nuns, but we never see them. At the time of Francis and Clare, there was what is called a penitential movement. That means people, predominantly lay people, who wanted to really live the gospel seriously. They would get together to do two things: praying and works of mercy, misericordia, taking care of poor people, sick people. It's in that context that we can understand Francis and Clare, and especially if our main source is their writing, what they wrote and not what other people, man, wrote about them. So, Clare and Francis should never have been together. Clare is from the Upper Assisi, the nobility, land owners. Francis is part of the business craft world in the lower part of Assisi. They don't mingle. They're in rivalry. Even at some point in civil war, when in the late 1190s, the lower part of Assisi, the money people, actually rebel, kick the nobility outside of Assisi. They flee, Clare's family, in exile in Perugia. Clare at that time is about 6. Francis is 17. It's a young adult. How come they got together? Well, we know that what happened to Francis. All these dreams evaporated, depression, and then all of a sudden, an experience of misericordia, mercy, with the people with leprosy, those outcasts of the outcast, and practicing the gospel with them, attracting people, and from the countryside, from the business class, from the nobility. Among the early brothers is a certain Rufino, who is a first cousin of Clare. And we know that Clare was looking for something, a third way. She didn't want to get married. We will hear later, after she died, when there is a process and investigation for canonization, that there is an old man that comes, and Clare was so beautiful, I was in love with her, but she didn't want to marry me. But she didn't want to become a nun in enclosure, a Benedictine nun either. So when Francis started doing his evangelical life and attracting people, including a first cousin of Clare, she is interested. And the cousin will help secret meetings. And Francis was actually quite excited with expanding his fraternitas to also women, sisters. What they did right, they got the blessing of the bishop. The bishop was smart enough to see that they were serious. They were not playing. And so it's the bishop that arranged the whole thing. And the whole thing was that one night, Clare and a few others, they had been literally cooking in the kitchen and say, this is how we can do it. But the bishop was on top. And once everything was ready, he gave the signal to Clare. On Palm Sunday, the bishop came down the steps at Santa Maria Maggiore, the first cathedral, to give the palm to Clare, and I'm sure a little wink. Tonight. Okay, that's nice. Seems romantic. That's not easy. Clare lives in a mansion in the Upper Assisi. They have janitors. The house is guarded. So it's not like at midnight she will come and say, I'm going for a ride. But the houses have a special door that is used only when there is a funeral. Some superstition. There is the special door to take the body out. She didn't care. She used it. That's the first step. Second step, you have to get out of Assisi. There is a wall around Assisi and a few gates. Guard it. Yes, it happens that the gate that opens to her going down to the valley, where Francis and his brothers are, is under the jurisdiction of the bishop. So she exits Assisi. On the other side, Francis and a group of brothers are there. They go down at the Porciuncula, where the brothers were living. And then there is, of course, something that Francis has to do that normally the priest would do, the bishop would do, but Francis does it, I'm convinced, because the bishop told him, do it. It's to cut Clare's hair. It's in culture. A woman with short hair, you cannot marry. And later, when the uncle of Clare will come to take her back home, she will just show her hair is cut. So then Clare and her companions stay with the brothers. No. No, that would not be a good idea. Where? Well, before a real definitive dwelling could be provided, the bishop has jurisdiction to a nearby monastery of Benedictine nuns. But not just a monastery of nuns. It is a monastery that has a privilege of sanctuary. We talk a lot of sanctuary these days. That means that whoever, criminal or whatever, is inside and touches the altar is untouchable or will be excommunicated. And excommunication, sometimes I wish we still would have it. You don't have access to the sacrament anymore, and there is a fear of hell. And whoever deals with you is excommunicated too. So forget buying bread and veggies, etc. Untouchable. So that was smart from the bishop, because it was anticipated that the next morning the uncle, who is the head of the family, Clare's family, we know the name, but is totally absent. Dead? Gone? We don't know. The head is a Monaldo, who is definitely not a happy camper. So after cutting the hair, they escort the women to the Benedictine monastery, where, of course, the next morning the uncle shows up. But sanctuary, cut hair, he's furious, but he goes back to Assisi. Then is the preparation of what the life of Clare and companions will be. There is that place under the jurisdiction of the bishop again, just outside of Assisi, a little church dedicated to San Damiano with a little hospice, a little shelter. Actually, we should say it's San Damiano, Damien, and Cosmas. Those are twin healers in the 3rd century of Christianity in the Middle East, who were actually executed because they were Christian at the time of the persecution. So that place dedicated to San Damiano, with a hospice and a spring of very good water, was since the 900s a healing place. Now you may wonder, why that place? Just because it was available and the bishop had power on it? No, there is more to that. It happens that actually Clare was a healer. Clare has healing power. And so there in San Damiano, they developed the life, the same evangelical life as the brothers, but in one place, while the brothers are moving on the road. There is no question that women would do that, and certainly not with the man. That people say, that's not really kosher. But the way of life that they developed was the same evangelical life. They were praying together, they were serving each other, and they were helping people who would come to their place. They would not necessarily go, although it is unsure that they didn't go and help the brothers at the leprosarium. But people were coming. How do we know that? We have all the stories showing up after Clare died. And it's in conformity with what Clare wrote because at some point she wrote the form of life of her community. They call themselves the Poor Sisters. And there is service outside the monastery. The monastery is their house. And the hospice is next to it. So some are, as we would say today, playing nurses. And Clare is leading that. We have two very good stories about that. One is that a certain brother Stephen, got crazy, lost his mind. And Francis didn't know what to do. So what did he do? He took Stefano to San Damiano and dumped it there. And Clare took care of him. We don't know what she did. But he got his mind back and returned to the brothers in the Porciuncola, sane and happy. Another story. The last years of Francis's life were difficult. Very difficult, including in terms of health. It was in a way connected. And so we are in the winter, January, February 1225. He's very sick, and he has a horrible problem with eyes. He can't stand the light. Well, he will spend 2 months in the hospice care of Clare and the sisters in San Damiano. And it is during that time that he composed that beautiful canticle of the creatures, or canticle of Brother Sun, that actually he called La Lauda di Dio, the praise of God, because it's a song of gratitude. You know, praise be you, thank you for the sun, the moon, the stars, the water, the earth, and then going in through our human condition with illness, with conflict, and eventually with death. I suppose you know the piece. If you don't, go and get it. So those are concrete examples that to define Clare in terms of nuns living in strict enclosure is something that has been built and imposed after she died. Proof? Yes, that's the way that Clare is described in the document making her a saint. She's made a saint the way that the hierarchy wanted to see her. The same thing has happened with Francis. He's described as a military. He went everywhere to make peace. Then I told you that Clare wrote the form of their life. It is an amazing document showing how intelligent and perceptive and diplomatic and political she was. She wrote that in the last year of her life. So that means almost, 25 years after Francis had passed. As long as Francis was alive, Clare and the sisters in San Damiano were kept alone. As soon as Francis died, the new Pope, former Cardinal Ugolino, who had been already spending almost 10 years trying to organize and regularize groups of religious women in Italy, but as always, stay away from San Damiano. He comes to Assisi to canonize Francis, Saint Francis, the local hero, and then comes to see Clare, that he has seen several times. He had been doing retreat at San Damiano. And he come to see Clare and said, well, my dear sister, Francis is gone now. So I think for your own protection, you should probably join my group, my federation of San Damiano, as he called it, which meant adopt the constitution, the rules, or, all the legislation. He was a canon lawyer, which were traditional monastic life. Clare was smart. She saw that she could not escape that, but she asked the Pope to sign a particular document. The document is called Privilege of Poverty. What the heck does that mean? Well, the poverty understood in the Franciscan movement, Francis and Clare, the brothers, the sister, is we do not appropriate anything so that we can share everything. But the traditional monastic poverty is individually monks and nuns own nothing, but for the monastery, you need to have properties. Otherwise, if you keep just praying and singing, you're not going to last long. So basically, monasteries have land cultivated by people, and part of the production comes to the monastery. That was exactly what Clare and the sister did not want, refused. So there is a document that is signed by the Pope, but if you read it, it's not the language of the papal secretary. It's flowery, it's quoting scripture, and basically it says that nobody will oblige the sisters to accept things they don't want under excommunication. Okay. Thank you, Your Holiness. Nobody will dare to say, you should have this. What is absolutely unheard of at the time, it gives the women total control of their social and economic life. That is a first.
Well, I think when you say all that, you answered questions number 2 and 3 already.
But that was long.
Good, but Jean-Francois, what's striking me is in that question was the word radical. You know, we asked that question, like somebody asked it.
Yes.
Why was it, you know, what was radical? And sometimes when I hear the word radical, I think of anarchists. I think of people doing violence. I think of people doing that kind of stuff. Well, I don't think Clare was radical. Clare was following the voice of God.
Well, I think that's radical.
Yeah. Thank you. So,
You know, I
can
think
see how radical, yeah.
we often understand radical as extremist.
Yeah.
Radical means connected to the root.
Ah.
And the root of their life in the Franciscan movement is the gospel. All the gospel, only the gospel. That is radical.
Oh, yes, I agree. I hear it now. So thank you for educating me, because I'm,
You know,
when it comes to words, I'm not an, what do you call it, etymologist or whatever.
you know, several times we have a group, I've been asked, you know, no vocations, the groups are shrinking, and is there a future? I said, if we want it, the future is in the roots. Go back to the roots. So, like for instance, if you're happy with that monastic picture of Clare, if it works, but if it doesn't work, that's not the root. That's a portrait that had been designed after her. I was mentioning, she finally put in writing her form of life. That's the first time a woman does that. The first time a woman writes the form of life or the rule for a community of women. All the rules for women have been written by men previously. 10 years after she died, a pope came with a new rule that would promote the monastic picture. Although her text, her form of life, is a gem, she was smart enough to know what the hierarchy wanted to see in the text, with their obsessions with enclosure and poverty. So she uses the text from the previous document issued by the hierarchy. She uses what she knows they want to see, but putting a little correction here and there. For instance, once she is admitted in the monastery, she will never go out again, period. Oh no, Clare put a comma, except for obvious necessities. Ta-da!
You know, when you're saying that, what strikes me, that's why I was like, if I could get this back, because it's wonderful listening to you share these stories, because it affects the whole Franciscan movement. And one of the things I'm grasping here is that as a Franciscan brother, we don't do things on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Clare didn't do something on her own. Radical, of course, especially the way you defined it. And I mean, sneaking out of the, even though the bishop gave her the wink and gave her the nod and said, go for it, I walked that course last couple of years ago. That was a scary thing for a woman to do.
Yes.
Scary. And she did it.
Yes.
And down and down and down and down, and then even after they met their brothers, then they had to walk down all the way to the Porciuncle, where it's pretty scary down there. Bad things could happen to you. And within the Franciscan movement, Claire's, would you say that Clare, in her understanding of that movement, her connection with Francis, was that connection of togetherness? I don't do this on my own. Francis, you don't do this on your own. Maybe Francis was already saying, I'm not doing this on my own. Claire, like sending Stephen there to the San Damiano to, like, here, I'm going to put you there. So, is that fair to say?
Yes,
Cool. And then, like, when I think of this Claire, and I think within this radicalness, what would you say that she's saying to us today, men and women, maybe particularly to women? How do you follow something and be yourself?
well, I would like to say two things here. Clare did not follow Francis.
Right.
Clare wanted to follow Jesus.
Mhm.
And she found herself in tune, in sync with the way Francis was following Jesus. There is a very good film that was produced probably a good 20 years ago in Italy for the RAI, Radio and Television Italian. And it was showed 2 evenings because it's 3 hours. So each evening it was an hour and a half. And you can do it in pieces. The title of the film is Clare and Francis. Not Francis and Clare.
Nice.
Clare and Francis. And it will show episodes of their life in parallel. But it starts with Francis walking in a field and Clare walking behind and getting close to Francis. Francis turned around and smiled and said, "Are you walking in my footprints?" And Clare smiled in return and said, "No, deeper ones." That's the tone of the whole thing. Deeper ones.
Yeah.
So they don't look at each other, they look together in the same direction.
Wow. You know, that's so beautiful. I got to just share this story. If Sister Mary was still alive, she'd get mad at me. Anyways, the poor Clares used to be in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And I used to visit them when I lived in the Bronx. And Sister Mary was this little nun who used to come here when she came to the Institute, and they would come up here. And she told me this story once. And this is how they moved to a cloister. How, I don't want to use the word radical, but how confining this thing of cloister became. She said, you know, years ago, when we had to put the garbage out, we had a big stick. So you can imagine, this is the garage. They open up the garage door, and they push the garbage out with this big stick. Then they close the door. When the garbage man comes and picks up the garbage, they lift up the door and they reach out with this big stick and pull the garbage can back into the garage. Well, Sister Mary used to get mad at her. Why is that the only story you remember? Well, I remember it because I thought it was hysterical. Well, the numbers dwindled in that poor Clare monastery, and Sister Diane, who was there, started a federation out in Cincinnati. And they're back to the closer to what Jean-Francois shared with us about Clare. People come to them for prayer. People come to them for retreats. I make retreats on there. I have breakfast with them, and we tell wonderful stories and laugh at each other and have a great time. So they are that ministry, but they are prayerful women in that cloistered sense. They spend lots of time in prayer, praying for us, praying for the world, praying for whatever. And it's, if we believe prayer has an effect on things, it's very powerful. But maybe just, we could move to this question. This is number 4. I don't know if anybody's calling in any. We got 4 and 5. But maybe just you could highlight a little bit. Early Franciscan women, such as Clare, and because Sister Margaret wanted to talk about Mary Ann Cope, weren't just followers of, as you just said, followers of Francis. They helped shape the movement in their own right. Can you talk a little more about this and their influence? Their influence differed from the influence of the male Franciscan communities.
Again, if you go back to the root, where in the Franciscan movement, the men are brothers and the women are sisters, and develop fraternitas. They develop fraternal, brotherly, sisterly relationship. That is actually what I like to call an alternative society. Because that's the society that Jesus is trying to promote through all his teaching and examples that we see in the gospel. He was not countering the Roman occupation, the collaboration of the Jewish clergy. He was promoting an alternative that was subversive, that was revolutionary. Yes, that's why they executed him. But that's exactly what Francis and Clare were trying to do outside of Assisi. They didn't reject the people from Assisi, but they left the system that they considered unfair, unjust, violent, and certainly not Christian. Oh, yes. Athena always wants me to talk about Clare's leadership, which I like to do. When San Damiano became quite, let's say, known, Francis got nervous that Clare and her sisters were not fitting the dominant paradigm. Their way of life was not marriage and was not monastic, strictly monastic. So he had that idea that Clare should take the title of abbess, which is the head of a monastery of nuns. Abbess. Clare didn't want it because of the model. But according to a testimony of a sister who was there, Francis actually forced Clare to take, he didn't give up. No, you must take the title. Then it will look normal. Clare took the title because she knew the real meaning of the word. It means mother. And as I like to say, she changed totally the description of the job. The abbess of a monastery is a queen, is a monarch. So she changed the job description, and her leadership became the leadership of a sister that is the mother for each of the member of the community. Francis actually has the same, the Franciscan and Clarian definition of brotherly relationship or sisterly relationship. It's like a mother loves and cherishes her child. Toward the end of his life, when things were difficult and early brothers were in tension with a new generation that was taking the brotherhood in a direction that they didn't want, Francis wrote a little note, his own hand, to Brother Leo, who was his secretary, but also, I think, the head of those who were exasperated with the changes. And he writes, "Brother Leo, I'm writing to you as the mother. Francis didn't want to be the whatever superior or not even the minister general. He was, from the beginning, he was the mother of the brothers that God had given him. Clare is the same." So it's very interesting because it's not to say, well, mother is for a woman. No, Francis calls himself the mother of the brothers. So Clare developed that mother relationship with the sisters, which means, first of all, for the community, her task, she wants to build consensus. So not make the decision. She has in the community some counselor who could give some advice, but the decision is made by consensus. Are you kidding? No. We even have a document, a power of attorney dated 1238. Somebody had given a piece of land to the community and they didn't want it. All together, in consensus. They didn't want it because they didn't need it. So they give power of attorney to a lawyer to liquidate that, sell that thing. Normally, that kind of document would be signed by the head of the community. We have 50 names on the piece of parchment. All the sister, which also tells us that there were 50 in 1238. That's quite a group. So the consensus. And then she also wants to lead by example. And she does. And then she also wants that every sister feels so comfortable with her, like a lady with her servant. So approachable, constantly approachable. That's an unusual style of leadership in religious community, at least at the time.
I love when you're sharing that because, and thanks for bringing that up, because Francis calls the guardian.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know abbess meant the same thing, abbot or abbess. And because my experience of Benedictine monasteries, the abbot is king. And I haven't been to a woman, a female monastery where we got the queen. And I'm thinking, now Clare died in San Damiano, is that correct?
Yep.
When, so historically, this is, because I don't know. So we have Francis going through the troubled times when all of a sudden we get ordained ministers and they're saying, we can't live like that. We can't, that's the whole story. And so now we're starting to change. And then Clare passes away. When did they move to the cloister? Santa Chiara. Because that's a cloister.
It is.
No doubt about it.
I never found the door, and I don't know how to get in.
Yeah. And Franciscans, when I joined, guardians were considered the boss.
Mhm.
And coming out of the military, I did not like boss. I did not like that language. And then the more I heard about guardian and coming here, I could have my disagreements with the guardian. I really love Dan Riley and his form of guardianship. I love Brother Kevin because he learned from Dan and form of guardianships because I see it with that motherly instance. If I go to Cincinnati Port Clare's, I don't see no queen out there. I see somebody who cares for the community, and if they were going to sell something or do something, it would have all the names.
Yes.
So, did those two things coincide?
Mhm.
Historically, like I mean, I'm not a historian, so what was happening in the males and the women before the women moved to Santa Chiara? Was that the bishop?
No, it's the Pope.
The Pope?
It's the papacy. Because that's their way of thinking. So why did they move them from San Damiano to a brand new monastery inside the walls? It was to protect them. But at the same time, they changed their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then couple of years after the moving into that monastery, that's when the Pope create the rule for the Order of St. Clare, which is replacing the document that Clare had written and is the form of life of the Order of Poor Sisters. Now the Council of Vatican II asked in all the aggiornamento, renovation, to go back to the roots, to go back to the sources. And that's when attention to the form of life of the poor sister written by Clare came back. There may still be some monasteries using the rule of Urban, but most have the form of life of Clare. However, to take the text is one thing. To live the text is another one. And the tension is still there.
Yeah, thanks. To be fair to these questions, and it builds on that a little bit, and I don't know if this is a fair question, because it's a tough one. Suppose Clare were alive today, I could say this about Francis too, what do you think she would be doing?
Oh, I know. She was a healer. She would be involved in healthcare, and healthcare for all.
Wow.
Yep.
I agree. I think I would, yes. And if somebody else asked.
That's where the healthcare access.
Yeah.
Was that question planted?
I think it must be. It's number 5. How well did Clare's life, as well as other Franciscan women, inspire your Franciscan journey? What, if any, parallels in your own life can you share with our audience? So as a person who got into the Institute and studied and journeyed that, has Clare been influential in that for you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a journey. So I was named and baptized after Giovanni Francesco, Il Santo di Assisi, the saint from Assisi, because he was baptized Giovanni, John, and nicknamed Francesco. My parents gave me the full name. I didn't realize that until at the university, a course on Italian literature, to find with pride that the earliest, the oldest document in Italian literature is Francis's Canticle of the Creatures. And I hear the teacher saying that yeah, the author is St. Francis of Assisi. His name was Giovanni, nicknamed Francesco. I come home and I say, did you know that? And my parents went, yes, that's why we call you like that. Well, I always had a veneration for and an inspiration from my patron saint. But growing up, it was with the little flowers, which I call the Franciscan fairy tales. That they're good, and they have important message in them. And of course, I have a sister that is 19 months younger than I, and was named Clare. So there was all that imagery. But in all those stories, Clare appears once or twice. And it's really like she's a chapter in the life of Francis. And literally, in the lives of Francis, most of the time, Clare is just one chapter. I did not know much about Clare of Assisi, except she was connected to Francis. Actually, I did not know much about Francis either, I realized, because all I knew were things written by others on him. Until I'm in my first year of teaching high school. I was 21 at the time. And a friend gives me a little red book. Not Mao Zedong. A little red book in French, the writings of St. Francis of Assisi. I had no idea that he had left writings. So I started reading that. And then I saw that, well, he didn't write that in French. He wrote, I investigated, he wrote it in Latin. Okay, I want to read the original Latin, which was not difficult since my master was in classical languages. I got fire. And it has never changed. My Franciscan identity is rooted in the writings of Francis, which also took me at a very different level of being a Christian, because it's full of quotes of the gospel. So I started reading the gospel very differently than just a reading in the liturgy. And how they are different. It's a different perspective. So it started a passion that has continued and is continuing today. If I became a scholar, it's because of that. I had no intention to become a PhD university professor, but I wanted to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I found myself in a situation, oh, you're a scholar. When did Clare appear? Ah, because I met some poor Clares, and they asked me to give them some teaching workshop on the Testament of Francis. And then my friend, Marie-France, why don't you do the same on the Testament of Clare? She left the Testament. So I started doing research to find out that we had a few writings, but nobody has paid much attention. We had 4 beautiful letters that she wrote to a woman, princess in Prague, that she never met in person. She wrote that amazing form of life. She wrote a testament. She wrote a blessing. That's what we have. And in bits and pieces. And we were in 1975, and 76 was the anniversary, 750 years Francis' death. Well, this is 800 years. And I was working at my university in Louvain, using big IBM computer to produce tools for research. The tools, concordances of the early Franciscan documents. And I was in touch with a friar preparing a new critical edition of the writings of Francis, and so I could use his text so that when he would, in 1976, produce his critical edition, I would have the concordance based on the same edition. But then I said, I want to add the writings of Clare. So I took what was available here, there, and it's not a lot. Basically, it's 1/3 of what we have from Francis. And I was able to put that together and work. And so that helped me again to discover the kind of woman Clare was. Not a chapter in the life of Francis, not in the shadow of Francis. And it's actually, I don't think that Francis would have been as he was without the complicity with Clare. And I think to get deeper in the understanding of the woman Clare made me a better human man. I understood the beginning of Genesis, that Francis quotes, that God created the Adam, the human being, in the image and likeness of God, male and female. To separate is to ruin. It's created to be in connection, in relationship, in influencing each other.
Right. Yeah. But you know, before I ask you this question, I want to just thank you because, you know, as a Franciscan, one of the things I learned is we're storytellers. And often we don't tell our stories. We tell other people's stories. The first questions were really, you shared wonderfully, historically, their story. And thank you for sharing your story, because I hear it very inspirational, that hopefully other people can hear it. Who knows what's going on in people's lives? We don't know. And I never heard that full part of your story. And I appreciate that, because I do believe it touches our hearts and can touch people here, or people who listen. Because there might be people in that same walk in life where they're, wow, I really like it. And then they dive in, like you just said, and wow. This is the last question I have, and I don't know if Dawn got any questions that came from line. It's similar, but what is one Franciscan insight from Clare and these women that is relevant today that could shape how we live our faith? One small but courageous step they might encourage us to take this week.
Both Francis and Clare based their life on that beautiful Latin word, misericordia, which we translate in English by mercy, but I don't think the word mercy does justice to misericordia. A better translation, I think, would be compassion. I see in both Francis and Clare compassion. And again, the word means, it refers to an organ, cor, in Latin, the heart. And it means that my heart, my guts, feel miserable when I see your situation and I want to do something. I can go farther. In the four main religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, compassion is the first characteristic of God. Now, in Latin, the reference organ is, as I just said, the heart. In Hebrew, it's the uterus. God has a uterus. Protecting, promoting life. And compassion, that's what you want to protect, promote life. I do think that if there were more compassion and if more women would lead the way, we would have a much better world. We live currently in a time not totally, but where compassion is not visible. It's just the opposite that is dominant and visible. So I encourage the women to be compassionate, and I encourage the men to develop their feminine side.
You know, I keep, and I'm gonna say it again, last night I shared this quote, and Karen said, you keep saying that, and I said, I'm gonna keep saying it. But I was reading the Delio, and in the book, I forget who stated it, but it said, contemplation is the wonder and awe of love. And that's been really, I just use silly words, bugging me ever since I read it. In the sense, it's like the wonder and awe of love. And in my faith life, love, the ultimate expression of love, is the crucifixion. And if I take that into my reasoning, it makes no sense whatsoever. But it throws me back to sitting with it and saying, wonder and awe of love. Because we say that's God's ultimate expression of love as Christians. It doesn't jive with reasoning, but if I sit with it, it takes me someplace. And maybe it can help me be compassionate and get in touch with my feminine side. Dawn, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody here have a question or two?
Jean-Franc, this is the beginning of International Women's History Month.
Yeah.
And next Sunday is International Women's Day, right? And going back to Clare and to the women there, they didn't live in a vacuum. Can you speak a few bit about the other movements, the women that were active in that turbulent time, which is sort of like this turbulent time that we're in, that were very active and probably influenced them?
Well, at the same time, as I said, all over the Europe, Christian Europe, Western Christian, the penitential movement is alive. And it's a movement, not an institution. It's the desire to live something different, something else. There's a dissatisfaction in the general atmosphere in the society, and there is distrust for the clergy because they talk but they don't do in general. And so that's why I said it's predominantly a lay movement, although there are also clerics in it. We have the example of the penitential movement developed by Francis, joined by Clare, men and women. There are other things existing at the same time. A penitential movement in the northern Italy called the Umiliati. A penitential movement in the lower lands, Belgium, called the Beguines, where women actually, and it started with, women would be married very young. As soon as they could bear a child, that's it. The result is that very often a woman would be a widow very young. Could be a widow in the early 20s with 3 kids. So they started organizing themselves to support each other, forming, I would say, a small village called Beguinage. Still exist, not the Beguines, but the buildings. Those are little houses next to each other with a little garden and a little church. And so they support each other, they pray together in the church. So different picture or different expression of similar. What is interesting is that actually a béguinage in Belgium, having heard of San Damiano, turned to adopt the form of life of San Damiano.
And they were women.
In Bruges.
They were women.
In Bruges, women, yes.
One of those women is my hero, Angela Foligno.
Oh,
Well, when I was taking Michael Blastic's class one time, I said, boy, she's my hero. So I'm reading Angela Foligno's life. I come into class and I said, Michael, if this is what you got to do to be a mystic, I'm out. And his response to me, because Angela, if you read her life, it's like, there's no way I'm doing that stuff. And he said, when you read the mystics, read them all. I can't remember his exact words, but the way I took it was, read it like a novel. You read a novel and you take from a novel what resonates with you and you leave the rest. And there's a lot of her life that resonated with me, and she became I consider her my buddy. Even though I could never do some of the austerities she'd done in her life. And I think that, and she was one of the beginnings,
yeah.
at least for a little while, you know, and then she had a man writing all her stuff, and of course it's back to that.
Yeah.
Men writing the stuff, and they write it how they want, and so many women have been not interpreted correctly.
That's true. His story or her story.
Yeah. Hmm.
There's a question.
So, I mean, Claire had a little, she always had a question and she was always pushing limits a little bit. And Francis did too, but they never stepped away. So being raised a Protestant in France, I always think about the Protestants' claim is in France is that the return to the gospel and the doing away with all of the rest. So I just wonder, what do you know about? I mean, I know Francis never wanted to break away. Neither did Clare. They never wanted to. So can you speak to that? Like, why wouldn't they?
Because they care for people. They care for people. They both, and that's what Clare wanted to do, I think, before Francis. But she couldn't see how she could just leave the system and live an alternative based on the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
But Francis, actually, he didn't have a plan. What happened to Francis is that he was a party boy. He was really honored as the star of the Assisi youth, particularly because he would also always pick up the tab.
Mm.
Hey, Dad had enough. You open the drawer and here we go. But he wanted to be famous. He wanted to be not only rich, but also noble. And to be a noble, you have to be adopted by a noble. And you will impress a noble in the military. Prowess. He turned out to be a complete failure. And got sick from captivity and depressed. He was avoiding company in Assisi. And that's where he was caught by surprise. The people with leprosy, ugly, stinking, couldn't stand. And for no reason, one day, he embraced them. That's the turn of compassion. He got out of himself. You say, I'm miserable, they're even more miserable.
The total transformation.
It's after that then, reflecting on that experience, he rediscovered Jesus. He was not sent by Jesus. He didn't see Jesus in the leper, but it was a radical human experience that helped him understand what living the gospel really means. And he started. Then Clare said, okay, and they talked, and then they developed it. And it's a way of life, not a selection of people. Said differently, they exit a system, but they never were exclusive. The Franciscan movement is inclusive.
And didn't Francis, in his misery and embracing the leper, recognize that that person, man or woman, who was also miserable, was his brother and sister? I mean, it wasn't just that you're doing good. I mean, I don't think...
Because of Jesus.
Because, yeah, right. And I think the question about what could they have done differently, I don't know. I mean, that structure now, if we're Catholics and you don't want to do this or that, you don't. You're not going to be hung or you know, nobody can touch you. It's within the constraint, right, of what they could do historically at that time.
And I must say that Clare was much more assertive and fearless than Francis.
Somebody sent in a question, says, you know, this is my, me and Brother Juniper get along, you know, because Brother Juniper just, he was crazy,
Yeah.
couldn't say it. But I guess Margarita Poretti, somebody
Yeah,
asked, could you
Margarita
say a little
Poretti.
bit about her? I don't.
Yes, I
have no
think-
idea who she is.
I think another discussion where possibly Margaret would be able to come is to focus on some other names. You can find names in the little book by the women of the streets. Marguerite Porret is one. Margaret of Cortona is another one.
She wanted to talk about, I can't remember now. Marianne Cope.
Marianne Cope, yes. And there is a whole series of those women in the 13th century, the second part of the 13th century and 14, who don't find a place in the monastery of Santa Chiara. So they start practicing what they want to live on the streets by themselves. Then you will have also the beginning of women that will form a real religious community under the local bishop. The first ones were in Germany. The first one were in Germany when it becomes clear that what is essential to the evangelical life, living the gospel, is to be involved in works of misericordia. And once you're locked into a monastery, you can't anymore. So that's the beginning of those congregations of Franciscan sisters. Each one in response to an issue. Education, healthcare,
Like social work,
hmm?
like social work type.
social work, but getting together because of the gospel. So there is they pray together and then they work. Doing mercy. You know, in the beginning of his testament, Francis, in very few words, said, this is how it started. The whole movement started with my experience, unexpected experience, with the people with leprosy. And his Latin words that translate, his Latin words are, once he is with the people with leprosy, the lepers, feci misericordiam cum illis. That I saw translation in English, in Italian, doing, and I had pity on them. That's not what it means. It means I did mercy with them. And Francis is aware. He says that he quotes in the gospel. After Jesus tells the snotty lawyer about who's my neighbor, the Good Samaritan, and Jesus asked, so who was the neighbor? I said, well, the one who did mercy. But the interesting thing, this is a little detail, the interesting thing is that in the Latin text of the Bible, called the Vulgate, that was circulating at the time of Francis, and so that's what he knew. The text says, the one who did mercy to the wounded guy. To the wounded guy. Francis said, I did mercy with them. It goes both ways. To and received. And I went back to the original Greek, which is the original text of the gospel. The Latin text is not correct, because the Greek says with. Act of compassion is a two-way. It's a relationship, not I do good.
Poor thing, yeah.
Could you maybe say more in Claire's experience of one of the most profound things I appreciate from Claire's, some of her letters to Agnes of Prague, and then one of the things was to gaze, consider, contemplate, imitate. And I think in a contemplative life, that's such a profound invitation.
Yes.
And how I can gaze, and then I can consider, and then I usually well, I guess I'm done.
Well, the thing is, Clare uses, she's not the only one, but the way she uses that image of the mirror, Jesus is the mirror, basically. However, if you look in the mirror, you see yourself. The question becomes, does it look like Jesus? Do you look like Jesus in the mirror? That's what she writes to Agnes.
And so, yeah, because she talks about the mirror, and that's a lot of people wonder about, what's this mirror stuff? What is it? But it's a very contemplative
Yes.
activity, and that's it. So like the gaze, contemplate, would be, see, I always interpret her gazing at the crucifix and considering the story of the crucifix, and then contemplating it, and then imitating it.
Mhm. Yeah,
Is that fair to say as
And-
well?
because to imitate means to become an image of. It's not mimicking,
Wow.
it's more,
Yeah, say that again.
to imitate is to become an imago, an image, a representation, represent.
Hmm.
You make Jesus present again.
Oh, that's great, thank you.
Quite a word.
That's very helpful in my understanding of those words. Wow. Because I think of Clare too, one other story, we're almost running out of time, but we still got 11, 12 minutes in case anybody else something. So, the story of Clare and the Caesareans, Caesareans, am I saying it correct? Anyway, they come and she holds up the monstrance,
Oh, yeah. With the Muslims.
the Muslims.
Well,
It's a neat story.
there may have been the Saracens, as you know. There were Arabs fighting for the emperor.
Hmm.
Well, Clare knew the emperor. So she may have done more than just,
Hold up the monstrance.
yes, I know your boss. And they turned away.
Because she was still in San Damiano when she did that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what did Clare tell Agnes of Prague in her letters? What did Clare tell Agnes of Prague to do?
Oh, yes. So, background. We don't have the letters from Agnes. You know, the thing is, the evolution, the sisters became uneducated, and maybe it's sleeping somewhere, but
Yeah.
anyway, Agnes wanted to establish a monastery in Prague, actually like San Damiano, outside of Prague, and live like in San Damiano. She's in contact with Pope Gregory IX, who responds that, well, you know, what Francis gave Clare and the sister, it was nice, but it was like milk for babies. You better follow what I wrote, that's solid food. Agnes is furious and writes to Clare, and Clare responds, you know what you are called to live. If anybody tells you something else, you must respect, but don't do it. And there is no name, but the Latin has the gender, and the someone is a man.
Wow. Yeah, that's I love that.
Anyway,
Well, any other question?
How can Clare help us today in this divided political, horrible time we have?
I think the same. You know what you're called to do. Be fearless, be respectful, do it. In the current situation, I think there is a temptation to respond at the same level that what we hear. That's a mistake. It's really down, vulgar. We should not get on that field. Clare was respectful. I can picture, with a smile, I said, sorry, Your Holiness, no, I don't think so.
As a woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, I can tell you, Ugolino loved to come to San Damiano. I said he did retreat at San Damiano. We have a letter that he wrote to calling Clare his mother. I mean, he's almost in love with her. But when he came after the canonization of Francis, and that Clare has him to sign that document giving them control on their social and economic life, he never came back. Never came back.
Wow.
Which is a sign that he was pissed. With a smile.
Well, I don't, do you have any final words other than what you said about
Well,
the passion and everything?
I enjoyed very much because, yes, Clare is very dear to me. I'm so happy not only that she has lived what she lived and is an integral part of the Franciscan movement that continues. I always say there are orders, but that doesn't mean the movement does not exist. Those orders are in the movement. And so you can be in the movement without being in one order.
Hmm.
So I'm very grateful for that. And as I said, knowing Clare has enlarged my Franciscan identity, or even just my human identity.
Thank you. Well, I would say. One of the greatest things you taught me was the last time we did this, and I was very nervous about sitting here asking a question. You said, "Hey, it's Franciscan. It has to be fun." This has been fun, and thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.